right. Well, good morning. Um, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Dr. John Diaz. I'm assistant professor and extension specialist in the Department of Ag and Communications. And today's webinar is going to be focused on data analysis and reporting as it relates to extension program evaluation. So we're not going to be going over any really robust statistical analysis that you may see more in research. We'll be honing in on what you need to help to analyze the data that you're collecting for your program evaluations. So really the three main tests that we'll be looking at today is means, paired t-tests, and then just percentages. And that'll make a little bit more sense as we get into the presentation. So the first thing I'll be going over is means. And so this is just kind of a template or an example of what you may see within your own data for your workshop. So this is just some filler workshop data, and as you can see, there's data for pre-test, post-test, for questions 1 and questions 2. This is something that you may see within your Qualtrics and you can export into Excel, but I thought Excel would be the thing that most people have access to and can use to make sense and analyze their data. So really, doing a mean is really simple. You type in equals, average, and then you highlight the fields in which you want to calculate the mean. So for this one, I was doing it for the question 1 post-test. So if you just do that, it'll give you the means for each one of those. So it's really simple. And it's just a litmus test to understand as a group if folks are increasing their knowledge within different questions within your pre and post test. So I always say, what does this mean in regards to your packet? Because at the end of the day, we want to try to figure out how it gets to in our packet. So an objective for calculating mean may look like something like all program activities will increase the participants' average knowledge of at least X agricultural management best practices immediately following a program activity as measured by retrospective pre-post test. So for those of you who have taken a workshop of mine, you know that I'm a big fan of data tables. And so this is one way to organize your data in regards to program evaluation in a data table. So I just put in some filler data. So if you had 10 participants in a workshop, 10 of those folks responded to your survey, and you had all of them, let's say that their knowledge increased, or the mean showed the knowledge increased in one best practice. The data table above would be kind of the overarching reporting structure for your ROA. And then you could always get more granular in regards to those best practices. So if it's fertilizer, weed management, if you're in 4-H, safe and inclusive environment, developmental relationships, stuff like that. So it gives you an opportunity to provide some data for your overarching objective, provide some granularity of what that means within the context of each of your workshops and best practices, but doesn't really flood your reviewers with a lot of narrative that has to allow them to make sense of what your program is doing. So that was really quick to the point in regards to mean and how you would report within your packet. I like to have these paused for questions so that if you have any questions in regards to that first construct, you can ask and try to clarify what that looked within your program. So I'll give you guys a couple minutes. If you have any questions, just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask them.
Simple question here. This is
Hey, John, I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, VG, I'll have you go first, and Marguerite, I'll have you follow.
Sure, thanks. So if you're
go ahead.
drafting a survey, for example, would you have them respond in numbers 1 through 5, or would you have them respond in very knowledgeable, not very knowledgeable, and then are you able to have Qualtrics do it for you where it goes, it changes the number to the word to number or the number to word, if that makes sense?
No, that's a great question. So for a program evaluation, you definitely want to have those anchors so that the participants are understanding what each number means. Qualtrics will not automatically assign those numbers to the values, but that'd be something that would be really easy to go in and say, not knowledgeable at all is a 0 or 1 and adapt it in that way. So within Excel, there's a function of find and replace. So you just do a find and replace, for example, your not knowledgeables at all to a 0 and so on and so forth. And then that'll give you what you need to then transform it into a mean, as I showed within the data on the Excel spreadsheet. Marguerite, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. So, in the programs I do, we have people who are like new pesticide licensees and people who are just getting CEUs for existing licenses.
Right.
And so a lot of times I get the comments that, you know, the percentage of knowledge gain might be low for people who are doing renewal because obviously they know the stuff already. They already have a license. So I was just wondering, how would you address something like that? Because I mean, in the table that we're looking at, it says, yes, there's 100% of people 100% increase their knowledge.
Right.
But if I'm doing a CEU class and like 25% increase their knowledge, then I get the comments that that's not a lot of knowledge gain. So how would you address that?
So I think there's two things at play with that question. There's a program development component, and then there's a program evaluation component. So for the evaluation component in relationships to your objectives, that's where you would maybe bring that number down, understanding that there are going to be participants, that this will be a refresher course. So the likelihood of them increasing their knowledge is lower because they may be going into it already understanding these concepts or topics. So there's that piece. From a program development standpoint, that may then lead to an internal conversation of what do I need to do to enhance the rigor of that offering so that it's, while it is a refresher, it may introduce some new concepts and topics to allow for that knowledge gain. So it's not the same materials over and over again. It's got that core refresher component, but then there's possibly new topics or concepts that you could then leverage that knowledge increase within so that you're not giving them the same stuff and there's actually the opportunity to demonstrate knowledge gain.
Okay, thanks.
So I had another question in the chat. It says, sometimes not everyone will answer both pre and post test. How do you deal with these data points? And that's also a great question. So one of the ways in which I try to get around the disconnect between pre and post is utilizing what's called a retrospective pre-post, which allows your participants to identify what their baseline is in addition to what their knowledge increase is both after the activity. So then rather than leveraging a test asking them to identify their knowledge before and then knowledge afterwards, you're asking them to do both afterwards. And that's actually a more valid construct. And it's really predicated on you don't know what you don't know. So I'll give you an example. You may be going into, a participant may be going into a workshop on, let's say, cooking. And they feel like going into it, oh yeah, I am a 5 out of 5 on all these different constructs. And then they get into the workshop and they're like, holy smokes, I thought I was a 5, but I was really a 1, so now I am a 3. So by doing the retrospective, it allows them to then reflect on their knowledge after being engaged with the subject, so they get a better understanding of where they were before and where they are now because they've actually engaged in the activity. So again, by doing it in that way, you're asking for pre and post test data all at the same time. And that alleviates that disconnect of people having to take a pre and a post. And I usually recommend if it's 1 hour, a half day, even a full day workshop, I lean towards the retrospective so that you don't have folks thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to go to this workshop and have to fill out 2 surveys. Having them only do 1 is actually more beneficial. And then if you were to do, let's say, a 6-week survey or 6-week series, then you want to think about actual assessments and the traditional pre and post test. So that would be my answer to that. Do you have a question and follow-up? Nope. Okay. Any other questions before I keep moving? All right. Well, we'll have more pauses for questions later on. So if you think of something, just go ahead and chime on in. So the next test or analysis is paired sample t-test. And the paired sample t-test is a test to compare 2 samples that are interconnected. And in the context of extension and program evaluation, that's where you would compare pre-test data with post-test data to see if there's a significant difference in the scores in those two scales. So I'm teaching towards Excel. Excel is something that everyone has access to. I personally do t-tests within SPSS, but that then creates a labyrinth of trying to figure out how to access SPSS using UF apps and all that good stuff. So I'd rather make things easier rather than more complicated. So to be able to access the functionality of doing paired t-tests in Excel, you have to go to your menu where it has options here. So like if you were to go to print, you go down to options, and then you go into add-ons, because the way that your Excel is set up, you won't have this automatically enabled. And once you go to add-ons, you'll go into where it says inactive application add-ons, and you'll activate your analysis tool pack. So because mine was already activated, you'll see in the active application add-ins, but for you all, it will be in the inactive. So you just go in and activate it, and you'll have this data analysis tab on the upper right-hand corner that'll allow you to do more inferential statistics, and in this case, the paired sample t-tests. So again, we're looking at the same set of data that I had for the means, and the means are still in there. So when you click on data analysis, you'll go to t-test, excuse me, and you'll look at paired two samples for means. So you're comparing the sample of the pre-test data with the post-test data. Then you'll want to identify the variable range. So essentially what variables you'll utilize to conduct this analysis. So for your question one, you highlight the numbers for question one, and for question one post, you do that as well. And this will give you this output. And so really what this is doing is making sure that the difference in your pre and post test is not by coincidence, it's actually statistically significant. And the way in which to identify if it's statistically significant is with the p-value. The p-value is the measure of significance. So if that number is less than equal or less than 0.05, then that means the difference is significant. And the difference is an increase between the 2.4 and 4. So the t-test here is showing a negative 5.23 because that's going from 2 to 1. So if you were to do it from 1 to 2, that would be a positive 5.237. I'm not going to go into what the t-test actually means, but this is just to say that the difference between your pre-test and your post-test is showing that there is a significant increase in the knowledge of your overall audience as it relates to that question. And I did that also for the second set of data. And as you can see, there's a significant difference within that too, because your p-value is less than or equal to 0.05. So again, trying to connect it to our ROA and what that means for reporting. So an objective may look like all program activities will provide a statistically significant increase to the participants' average knowledge of at least X, and I use X because you'll make the determination of what that looks like. Agricultural management best practices immediately following a program activity as measured by retrospective pre-post. So these would be the different components that you would think of, and you could put more or less best practices, thrust your constructs, if it's horticulture, 4-H, food and nutrition, etc. You can incorporate that. And then I follow for the overarching table that same construct. So how many participants did you have? How many responded to your survey? And then what was the percent of outcome attainment? And then if you want to get more granular as it relates to the t-test, you have your different best practices, what the p-value is and t-statistic is, so that you can get an idea, or those that are reviewing get an idea of the influence of your program as it relates within those different best practices. And again, this is very data driven, and you have the opportunity to clarify and provide more details in your impact statement and success story, but this is a way in which the reviewers can really see very directly and concisely the impacts of your programs. So now that we've gone over a really basic example of paired t-tests, I'd like to take another pause just to address any questions as they relate to the t-test, what that might mean in your own program area, or just general questions on what we've gone over so far. I'll give you guys a couple minutes if you want to type it into the chat or just unmute yourself. We can address some of those questions.
Dr. Diaz, p-value and all the stuff you just talked about wouldn't necessarily have to be incorporated for every objective that you have.
No, and this is really predicated on how you want to craft your objectives. So if you want to do it at the aggregate level for the entire kind of cohort for the workshop, you can do it in that way. But again, you don't have to have significance or difference of mean or any of that within all of your objectives. So I would just say use your best judgment on what you think makes the most sense, and
Okay.
then connect it with the type of analyses that you think would make the most sense. So we've got one more kind of construct to go over, and this is a construct that I use, but I know there's a lot of folks that are doing kind of that pre-post test with varying levels of knowledge and stuff like that. So I wanted to at least provide some semblance of a analysis plan for those folks who are trying to do that. Does that make sense, Samantha?
Yeah, I did. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Question on the table that you had on the previous slide where it says 2019 TSTAT placeholder.
Yes.
What is that supposed to be?
So that was, I didn't run a paired t-test for 2019, so I just have that as a placeholder.
Okay, and just so that I know what that TSTAT would have been, so in your 20 you have 5.24, so is that in the example? Where did you get that TSTAT?
So if you go back to the example,
Mhm.
so for this one, it's 5.237.
There it is, okay.
Yep. So that's just telling you the degree of influence or the degree of difference that the t-test found. So the higher the number and the lower the p-value, the more increase in knowledge that you can attribute to your workshop.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. And if you're interested, you can you kind of do a review of what a t-statistic means, but I didn't want to get too far in the weeds with this webinar. Any other questions? All right. So now we'll focus on percentages. And percentages is probably the most predominant way in which to craft objectives and to analyze your data in regards to program evaluation. This is the way that in which I do my program evaluations and I report my data. So I'm looking at the percentage of knowledge increase within my overall audience. So this section will actually not have a data analysis plan. I'll just unpack what I do to make things as easy and seamless in incorporating that data into your packet. And I hope that you guys will consider this because I know that as extension educators, you have a lot that's on your plate. So the easier you can make this process for you all and show your impact, the easier things will be overall. So this is the kind of the construct that I use to help to get to percentages. I'm using an example that we created for 4-H. And so within all of the post-workshop surveys that I teach to or utilize myself, I create this matrix that essentially outlines the key constructs, topics, or concepts that I'm trying to teach within my workshops. And this, by doing it in this way, it allows folks to just simply identify if their knowledge increased or did not as a result of the workshop. You know, obviously this isn't the most statistically rigorous way in which to do it, but it provides the data that you need to understand where folks are increasing their knowledge for programmatic improvement. And then for your objectives and reporting in your packet, it gives you those clean percentages. And so if you were to create something like this for your own program, all you have to do within Qualtrics is go to your reports function, and it gives you really clean and simple percentages of how many folks reported a knowledge increase in each and which ones did not. One of the things that I always tell folks to do as a higher order question before this is asking their participants to identify if their knowledge increased in, for example, 1 or 2 of the best practices that were taught. So kind of connecting to your objective and within that question outlining what those concepts are. So you can essentially take that question and use it as the higher order percentage for those data tables. And then if they answer yes, then you can give them the opportunity to identify what that looks like within each of these constructs. And then for that secondary table, you would have these numbers really quick and seamlessly to integrate into your packet. And you can utilize this even if you don't do online surveys. So if you were to do a paper survey, I would say you just collect that survey and then you can input it yourself. So you have this centralized location of data and you're not having to kind of bring everything together at the end of the year to make sense of it and incorporate it into your packet. So again, connecting it to an objective and what that might look like within a program. So at least 75% of program participants will report increased knowledge of at least one program development and evaluation best practice immediately following a program activity is measured by survey. So as you see, I use the same structure, overall data with participants and respondents, a percentage that the outcome was attained, and then the different topics and concepts that you leverage within your evaluation and what the percentage attainment was within each one of those. So as you see, by using that construct that I just outlined in Qualtrics, this gives you a very easy way in which to populate both of these different data tables without having to do any type of analysis on the back end, because Qualtrics is essentially taking care of that for you. In addition to percentages, there's standard deviation and things of that nature. But this is, again, based on most of the packets I've seen, percentages are the most popular, the most well accepted, and this is a way in which to collect that type of data and provide the percentages without creating additional work for yourself. So that's kind of the percentage construct. I'm going to go ahead, and I don't have a pause for question slide built in here, but I pause for questions so that you guys can ask what this might look like in your program areas or provide any areas of clarification in regards to Qualtrics and how you can structure things.
My DED tends to prefer like number of people, X number of people have achieved your objective instead of percentages. And I don't know, I don't think I really have a question. I guess I'm just kind of wondering if that's a legitimate way to measure.
Yeah. So I know there are district extension directors that are concerned with the N value in regards to programs participants. And so it's a really quick and easy way in which to do that. All you'd have to do is, when you say at least 75% of program participants, you would in some point in time and within that provide parentheses to show, 75% of your N equals, let's say 35 participants. So they know kind of, and this is kind of marrying marketing goals with evaluation goals. So you're saying, okay, I want to have 35 participants targeted. And of those 35, I want to see change within 75% of them. So it's a real quick addition of, N equals, let's say 35 after program participants, and you'll have the same construct, but then, keep your DED happy because they'll want that N. And then as you see within the tables, we've got the N built in there, both within your overarching program, but then the N in regards to the kind of the sub constructs or subtopics that make up those overarching data.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Good morning, Dr. Diaz. I have a clarifying question.
Sure.
So in terms of the percentage outcome attainment, when you are using multiple constructs or that sort of thing, is that just an average then from the various constructs?
Yeah, so this would be, so the outcome attainment is the number of participants that reported knowledge gain of at least one best practice. So that's what that one means. And then the rest are how it broke down into the different practices or topics that you taught towards. So it's saying, okay, generally, what was my success level in achieving the objective that I have right above me? And then based on this objective or outcome attainment, what does that look like at a more granular level?
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yep. And that's why I tried to figure out the best terminology. So I have percent outcome attainment, whatever you feel like makes the most sense for you. But I'm just trying to, at a very basic level. So if a reviewer's looking at it and saying, oh, okay, what is the objective? What is the overarching program objective? Okay, this is it. Now, how successful are they at achieving this objective? And then just kind of going from there.
Dr. Diaz, good morning. This is Kimber.
Hey, Kimber.
From Miami. Hey, can you just kind of re-say what you said about using the higher order question first? Because I heard it, but I feel like if I hear it again, it kind of might sink in a little.
Yeah, most definitely. So so I kind of mentioned the higher order question, and I'll explain the challenges that I've heard from agents in regards to that matrix and why I feel like that overarching question is necessary. So if you were to leverage just the matrix question and not have that overarching, did your knowledge increase in at least one best practice, it essentially leaves it to you to have to go through each one of your participant surveys to see if they identified yes of at least one best practice. That may end up being a large, arduous task if you have a lot of folks. So a way in which to get around that is provide a question right before that matrix where you ask, as a result of your program, do you feel like your knowledge increased in at least one area? And identify those different areas up front and have them just say yes or no. And if they said yes, then they would use display logic to display that matrix. And then you ask them to really identify within these different constructs which one they were. So going back to this one, ask them, hey, did your knowledge increase in at least one of these areas? You can have that list of areas. They can evaluate if their knowledge increased. If they said yes, then that would open up this table and that give you the percentages that you can then incorporate in that second table. So I'm thinking besides getting data that's useful, my second goal in doing this type of stuff is making things seamless and easy. And I feel like that's a way in which to accomplish both of those.
Gotcha.
Sense, Kevin?
It does. Now I see, and I thought that's what you were saying before. It's reducing basically my labor
Yes,
of having to comb through the data.
exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Otherwise, you'd have to comb through the data, and that could. You guys have enough things going on, so.
True, and
Try to
that
take
also
one step out of the process.
Yeah, and that could also introduce more error.
Right. Exactly.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? All right. So that was it. I like to keep things short, sweet, to the point. And I just wanted to kind of unpack some real basic analysis processes. So like I said, I'll be sharing the recording of this if you want to go back and refresh your information. I'd also encourage you to contact me if you have any questions. I love working one-on-one with extension agents to really clarify different concepts or strategies within your own program area. So I'd encourage you to email me. Unfortunately, I'm not in the office, so that phone number will just get you to my voicemail. But if you want to dive into some questions as they relate to your program area, please feel free to give me a email. And we'll go ahead and set it at a time to help to move your data analysis, reporting, evaluation, any of those larger order needs. So I'd be more than happy to help. All right. Well, if you guys don't have any questions, you all have a great day. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll see each other soon in person. So you all have a good one.
Bye.
Bye-bye.